Great to have you here. Just to say, you can catch up via Canvas and YouTube if you'd like. And also as well, just to say, my name's Grace. I'm a lecturer in marketing at the school, and I'll be taking our session for today and next week. Just as well, a quick reminder also about your peer sessions. If you do need any times kind of amended on your peer sessions, please do reach out to one of the team, and they can try and assign you maybe to a different session that might suit you a little bit better. But let's move on now to taking a quick look at our journey through the programme. So if you were there last week, you'll remember that we highlighted the importance of articulating business purpose, and we kind of discussed how if we bring employees along with us when it comes to vision, mission, and values, we can kind of help to create a stronger organizational culture. Now, today we're going to be considering elements of marketing strategy. We're going to look at this from a slightly more stepwise and kind of formalized perspective today. And we'll be using a couple of kind of marketing frameworks and a bit of marketing theory to help us along the way. Namely, I suppose the framework we'll be using today is STP, or segmentation, targeting, positioning. So with that said, I would just like to go through sort of our learning and our action outcomes for today. So by the end of today's session, it would be great if you just had sort of a clear understanding of segmentation, targeting, positioning, what this means. In terms of mindset and skills, I'd just like to give you some time really to think and identify and discuss your own key market segments. Maybe consider what the uses are of a more strategic approach to thinking about classifying and targeting your customers. And then finally, just in terms of our action points then. So again, just giving you some time to kind of reflect upon where you think your business is currently positioned within the marketplace. And then also we would ask that, particularly when you're looking at your workbooks and etc., that you're starting to think out sort of new marketing ideas, and maybe have a bit of a discussion, a conversation around that with a colleague as part of the Help to Grow program, or outside of that. And that marketing idea can be as big as you like or as small as you like. Just briefly to run through the agenda for today. So with 5 different sections to cover. Section 1, we're going to be just going back to basics here and simply asking, what is marketing? And then considering it from an SME perspective in section 2. We'll then move on to kind of appraise the S and the T of the segmentation, targeting, positioning process, and give you some time to kind of chat that through with your peers, and kind of think about different segmentation strategies that you may have in place at the moment. Then we'll move on to kind of focus on positioning and mapping out your current situation. And then finally, we're just briefly going to touch upon the consumer decision-making process and introduce the 4 Ps, simply because we'll be kind of leveraging those frameworks next week as part of our in-person session next Thursday. So looking forward to that. If you do have your workbooks nearby, that'd be really helpful, but no worries if you don't. Certainly all of the activities are going to be on the screen anyway for you to engage with. So I'd just like to start off, I guess, with a little bit of interactivity, if you don't mind, and just get your thoughts on what is marketing? What does it mean to you? So you can scan the QR code here on the screen with your phone, and it'll take you to MS Forms, and there it'll ask you just to provide 1 or 2 words or phrases that maybe you think best describes the function or the activity or the purpose of marketing. And then what we're going to do is create a bit of a class word cloud, if you like, and we'll be able to then see how we collectively define or identify with the concept of marketing. So I'll give you a minute or two just to do that, and then we'll come back and see where we're at. So hopefully that was enough time for you to just kind of engage with that. And now hopefully I'll be able to, if this all goes to plan, pull up our word cloud on the screen here now. Okay, brilliant. So I think the word cloud is just forming here. So in the center, the most commonly used term seems to be sort of services and product, point of difference, customers. And so plenty of really relevant elements here coming through. But if we look at our statements, marketing is about connecting a business's products, services, and ideas to an end user. It's all about brand story, perhaps advertising, attracting potential customers, painting a picture, value proposition, tailored messaging. So, some great responses there, and very much linked to the concept of marketing and what marketing is. But what I'd like to do now is kind of just compare our ideas and our conceptualization of marketing then with sort of more formalized definitions. So here we have two definitions, one from the Chartered Institute of Marketing, first of all, and they define marketing as the management process for identifying, anticipating, and satisfying customer requirements profitably. Then the American Marketing Association, so the AMA, state that it is the activity, set of institutions and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that then have value for customers, clients, partners, and society at large. So, two slightly different definitions here. We can see that the AMA is kind of leaning more so into that kind of customer centric perspective of value creation and exchange, also highlighting there the importance of responsible leadership. It mentions this need to kind of create value for society through the marketing process. But when we take a look at the sort of CIM definition, yes, it's very much acknowledging sort of the role of the customer and the importance of satisfaction being delivered through value and not just this idea of selling products. But they also very much define it as a key management process. One that should have a systematic approach, maybe in terms of different things like deliberate planning or resource allocation, or maybe even just having a means to measure your outcomes so that you can prove accountability and profitability in terms of your marketing. And I think that kind of links into a lot of the work that CIM actually do. And they work a lot to kind of change the perception of marketing as one that is often thought of as a cost center. And we're trying to change that perspective to look at marketing more as a revenue driver. But of course, like that's very much easier said than done, particularly in tightening economic climates and when budgets are tight as well. But it's interesting to see that there is some overlap between what we have defined as marketing and these formalized definitions. But there are also some differences, and I have highlighted there some of the key words in red around the concepts of sort of exchanging and creating and value and satisfying the customer. And that kind of leads me into my next slide, I guess, because normally maybe whenever I'm presenting this, particularly to my students, they will always come back and say to me, "Oh, well, marketing it's advertising, it's content creation, it's social media," and to a certain extent, that's absolutely true. But there are fundamental building blocks that underpin the concept of marketing that then enable us to actually achieve those sort of tangible elements of marketing. They enable us to achieve good advertising strategies and creating relevant social media content. But these fundamental building blocks that I'm speaking to are empathy, value, and exchange. And we'll often hear sort of leaders in the marketing field kind of talk about empathy as the glue that we very much need in highly fragmented markets, because an empathetic approach allows for a much deeper understanding of your customers' challenges and maybe where pressures are lying for them. It also helps you kind of understand where their motivations are set and where their aspirations are, what they're trying to achieve. So This goes beyond just understanding what their technical requirements are or what their budget constraints are. Empathy much more so about kind of lifting yourself up out of the business and placing yourself in your customer's shoes. When you kind of use that lens and you have that vision, then you can better understand what their needs are. So whether that be their concerns about sort of choosing the right supplier, or maybe struggling to balance out things like innovation and risk, or concerns about maybe driving ROI, just for some simple examples. But the point here is that when you have a sense of where the pain points lie, it allows you to better find a solution and to serve your customers. But empathy also cited, for driving a variety of different benefits, be that differentiation, sort of efficiency, even to resilience. So, what we mean by that is when customers feel genuinely heard or engaged or understood, they're much more likely to work through challenges or contractual challenges collaboratively, with you, rather than just immediately then seeking other alternatives, or moving towards competitors. So that's kind of empathy in a bit of a nutshell there. But let's look now at these sort of building blocks of value and exchange. So they kind of come together, core concept of marketing strategy, because exchanges they're just happening all their time. They're happening even right now. And customer perception of value is very closely linked to exchange, because customers will create a mental assessment of the benefits and the sacrifices that they are making to better understand what is actually being delivered to them in terms of the products and the solutions that they are engaging with. So they'll be asking questions around, well, what do I get? How will the purchase be viewed, maybe by others, by colleagues, by peers? How much time is actually involved, in terms of face-to-face time, in terms of maybe digital time, and to actually onboard this particular product or solution? What is the cost involved as well? From a more B2C perspective too, you'll see consumers kind of ask questions of, well, how does this purchase make me feel? How does the product make me feel? What is the convenience level? Things like that. But just to kind of close off with on this particular slide, to make those successful exchanges that are valuable, businesses, marketers alike, we must analyze what each party is expecting from the transaction and from the exchange, and ensuring that we're providing that balanced value proposition as that exchange takes place. Because the moment then that maybe the balance tips in favor of the business, customers can become quite distrusting or disengaged quite quickly. So overall point here, working on these fundamental building blocks, getting empathy right, getting value right, getting the exchange right, allows you to more easily deliver upon our tangible attributes here of marketing, and allows you to create better communication campaigns that resonate, allows you to better understand your pricing strategies, and even right into thinking about new product development as well. And I think this nicely links into the Bain value pyramid that we looked at last week, you may remember, the value pyramid. So this is showing us that value isn't just functional. So it's not just about saving time. It's not just about reducing costs. Of course, these are highly important, but it is also showing that value can be built up through what are considered to be more emotional attributes or elements. So things like reducing anxiety, or providing entertainment, or thinking about different accessibility, or providing different access means. So all the way up to then thinking about creating different social impacts as well. So many different ways that we can create value today. Perhaps, the more elements that you can provide, the better, or even, the more that you can identify and deliver on specific values effectively that are relevant to your company and to the business, then the greater customer engagement and loyalty is likely to be. Okay, so we've kind of had a think there. We went back to basics. We've thought about what marketing actually is at its core, and we've talked about those fundamental building blocks. So, I'd like to now put marketing in the context of small businesses. And there is quite a lot of recent research out there that has identified many different approaches to marketing in small businesses. Some being more prominent approaches than others. So, I'd like to just take a quick look at these typical approaches that we do see. Now, that recent research that I just mentioned there does identify marketing within SMEs as often quite ad hoc and not really perceived to have any kind of defined role within the business. However, we do see these four approaches kind of developing out. So let's have a look at these, starting off, first of all, with our personal brand. So here we have a business as an extension of the owner. Customers are trading with the owner rather than actually the business or the brand. So this works quite nicely when you're selling quite complex solutions or very high value services. Ultimately, in this instance, your customer wants to know what the expertise is behind the business. They want to know your thought leadership. They want to see that you have industry presence, so that they can trust in what you are providing. So really powerful in those specialized industries, maybe professional services and manufacturing. Taking a look then at practice as a format for marketing in SMEs. So this tends to be really common, focusing much more so on the execution of tasks, rather maybe than thinking about marketing strategy or plans communications. So we lead here with a product orientation and delivery excellence. And very fair to say that this really builds credibility and trust in your product and solution. But when we think about the modern market today and the digital marketplace as well, even that excellence that you are demonstrating, it needs visibility, it needs to be shared. Moving then to take a think about perseverance as a format of marketing strategy. Long-term customer relationships are being built out here and they're being maintained. So a really heavy focus on things like account management and relationship depth. But what I would say is that perseverance isn't just about kind of maintaining those relationships. It's about consistently working to deepen them and doing that across touch points in your client's organization. And if you can, and where possible, it's also even more advantageous to kind of leverage these relationships to allow you maybe to engage with new clients and businesses kind of through your current clients. Then finally, we have our co-production. So this is where our customers are involved kind of in the specification and even the production and manufacturing of a particular product or service. So in this regard, it's not really about customization necessarily, but it is about involving clients and customers, in the entire development process. And what we're seeing is that some very successful vendors are actually engaging with their clients throughout the entire product development cycle and turning them into almost innovation partners in a way and sort of sharing information. Now, generally, we would see that the personal brand and the practice element are kind of a default starting point for SMEs when it comes to marketing. And ultimately, this is kind of on the basis of limited time and limited resource. But I think it's important to highlight that the challenge here isn't about picking one of these and doing it the best you can. It's about being able to sequence them when you need them, or you think about which of these is most relevant to your business, and then perhaps actually layering each of the approaches as your business is scaling and moving forward. And this will also then run in tandem with building out more outward communications that are focused on your brand and your company and your product. But what should we look out for then in terms of marketing, and specifically in the SME world? And I think the first point here is to kind of try and avoid this idea of marketing myopia, really just defined as a nearsightedness. So rather than seeing what consumers really want. You become very sales focused or product orientated or production orientated. So marketing myopia would kind of very nicely illustrate the danger of solely relying on that practice approach that we've just discussed, where companies get really focused on the execution and kind of losing sight of the changing customer need or requirement. I think also marketing myopia probably challenges the personal brand element and the perseverance strategies as well, just a little bit. Because even if you have a strong image or you have long term customer relationships, that doesn't mean that you're consistently working with them, to better understand what the evolving needs are. So we must keep that at the forefront. And it's why we often kind of think and acknowledge the theory of jobs to be done. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with it, but this theory was coined by Clayton Christensen, um, basically with the aim of trying to create an approach that helps you better understand your customer and also better understand what kind of business you're in. What is your purpose? And essentially, Christensen claimed that customers aren't buying products, they're buying solutions for the job that they need done. And so we've got some examples, some simple examples on the screen here. So if you are selling DIY equipment, for example, is it that your customer really wants that 4 millimeter drill bit? Most likely not. It's likely that what they're trying to do is put a picture on the wall. That's the job to be done. And so as a result, they need that 4 millimeter drill bit. Again, another sort of simple example here. If you're a rail operator, are you moving trains from A to B, or are you actually getting people where they need or want to be? And so it's kind of this question about what is the purpose of what you're doing, what is the job to be done. And again, looking at things from this perspective kind of helps us understand our customers' needs and ask that question: what type of business are we actually in relation to what we're actually helping our customers or clients to achieve? And of course, there just on the side of the screen, we have examples of established brands that, yes, had strong relationships. They had significant resources, certainly in their heyday, and they did have reasonable market presence, but yet they still failed by not continuously adapting to the modern market and what customers were looking for and what they wanted within that evolving market. So sort of poignant examples there. But ultimately, just strengthening our points from earlier. There's a danger in terms of complacency around the 4 approaches that we've gone through in the previous slide. We also are touching upon that the importance of constantly questioning, right? Well, what is our purpose? What is our customers' jobs to be done? What business are we really in? And also as well, leaning more so if you can into that co-production being really vital. And in those conversations around co-production, you really come to truly understand what your customers' needs are. So in relation to marketing activities, there are some core priorities that do require attention in SMEs, and here are just some on the screen. So choosing and targeting appropriate customers, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about that today. Same with positioning your offering to. Interacting with those customers that you've targeted, ensuring suitable digital presence, controlling the marketing effort, and then ensuring continuity of marketing performance as well. So I kind of want to ask you, I'm back with the QR codes again. I want to ask you where you feel your concerns lie in relation to these priorities. Do you struggle with some? Do you struggle with any? Or is there just one or two that are at the forefront of your mind at the moment? So I'll give you a second or two just to scan the QR code there, and we'll take a look at your responses. hopefully that gave you a little bit of time just to pop in your responses to MS Forms, and I can see your answers coming through there. So in terms of where your concerns are lying at the moment, so largely positioning your offering, interacting with customers as well, controlling that marketing effort, only at 4%, which is good to see, and then sort of sustaining the marketing performance as well. So I think largely then the two concerns is kind of positioning and also interacting with customers, or your clients. Traditionally, we have seen concerns, particularly around positioning of offerings, and also as well actually of controlling your marketing effort. But it's just as well today we're going to be sort of talking about choosing and targeting the appropriate customers, and then thinking and giving you some time to kind of discuss through your positioning efforts. So we are going to come on to talk about those key concerns for you today. So let's start that process then by taking a look at STP. First and foremost, beginning with segmentation and targeting, but we'll just define the entire process first of all so that you have an understanding of that. So STP is divided up into, of course, our three elements, which is segmentation, targeting, and positioning. Again, another cornerstone sort of marketing strategy. Without STP in place, attempts to kind of develop out new products or think about your marketing communications are likely to be less efficient, as you will essentially just to be marketing to all without sight of really who you're trying to connect with, or really who's relevant to your business. So time well spent on an STP process in advance can help you reap benefits and dividends as you progress later on. But just to walk you through STP, starting off, of course, with market segmentation, and it really is just defined as the subdividing of a market into distinct subsets of customers. Once you have done that, you move into market targeting then. So that's the process of evaluating these segments and then selecting those that you deem to be most attractive to pursue. So your segmentation in your first instance, identifying potential groups of customers, and then targeting is actually identifying those who are most attractive. Once you have that in sight, then you can start to think about how you actually want to position your company, your brand, your product, your solution to that target market. So market positioning, all about determining how a brand is to be perceived and how it is to fit into the mind and the lives of your target customers. So segmentation, figuring out who the potential groups might be, targeting, identifying the most attractive, and then positioning finally, thinking about how that brand, company, solution, product is actually going to be targeted or communicated at your ideal consumer. Now, in the first instance, I suppose, when we're thinking just about segmentation and we want to segment the market, we can use segmentation variables, and these are essentially just filters that will help you actually identify distinct groups that have similar needs or behaviors, wants, kind of value expectations as well. And these variables then are considered to be psychographic, behavioral, geographic, and demographic. Now, psychographic refers to kind of our lifestyle and our personality traits and those kind of factors. Then we have our behavioral variables. Quite self-explanatory, I suppose, here when I say behavioral, but they relate very much to our actions and our responses to things, our attitudes, and ultimately just how we behave and our behavioral factors. We then do have our more traditional variables, and they're considered to be geographic and demographic factors. Now, they're still really important, but often, not as useful. They're not really as sufficient on their own anymore. We do have some other considerations on the screen there in terms of using platforms like Acorn or Mosaic or Cameo. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with these on the call today, but they're essentially like consumer classification systems or platforms that are primarily used in the UK, and they provide demographic and kind of socio-economic segmentation and data. Now, in themselves, yes, very powerful, no doubt about it, provide really relevant information, but they tend to be more valuable when they're combined with, your internal customer data. That tends to give more relevant insights rather than when they're just used in isolation. So those would be the variables that we would use predominantly for B2C. When we look at B2B, we also add on then this firmographic variable. It is very useful for kind of understanding things like company size, perhaps investigating the capabilities that are available within a particular company of interest, thinking about their technological capabilities, what's their technology volume as well, looking at their purchasing approach. And I think also really valuable insight comes from understanding what the decision making unit looks like and how that acts within a company of interest. But also too, linking back into this psychographic and behavioral element, really important for B2B. In fact, I'm even going to link back to our conversation on empathy too. We're not just selling to companies, we're not just selling to the building, we're selling to people within those companies, all of whom have their own pressures, their own interests, their own targets. So using the psychographic and behavioral elements can be really helpful and remain relevant in the B2B world as well. So just to give you an example of one of these variables in action, particularly referencing behavioral variable segmentation, we're going to place this within the context of governmental communications here. So in this example, we have DEFRA, so Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. They're wanting to segment the traits of the population related to their sustainability responses and behaviours. So that's the aim. And they're trying to identify sort of common factors such as attitudes towards sustainability, and create sort of individual groups that they may be able to then speak to. So I'm going to run through just a couple of the segments here and their characteristics. I'll not go through all of them. So they identified a segment known as positive greens. So they do what they can and they feel really guilty about the rest that they can't do anything about. Then there's the segment of concerned consumers. So they'll do a lot, but they will give up on some things. They have an understanding for concepts like carbon offsetting, and they'll do their best in regards to that. Then we have our cautious participants. So they feel that they would do more if others did more. They're looking towards others to, start the ball, get the ball rolling. They're also quite pessimistic about what they feel they can achieve individually. And then finally, we have a segment of the honestly disengaged. So complete lack of interest, lack of concern, negative attitude towards change. They're concerned about what it would mean for themselves. And also perhaps maybe have a poor understanding or are not interested in conversations around sustainability, climate change, global warming, etc. So using this behavioral segmentation, DEFRA then were able to kind of better understand community thinking and responses to a certain concept, in this regard, sustainability. And then they were able to mold communications around these. They were able to target different forms of messaging towards different segments. Alternatively, as well, they were able to identify what segments were taking priority in terms of, who does need communicated with, and the different types of, like on the ground activities or efforts that needed to take place. So that's just a quick example there of behavioral segmentation in action. Now I have some examples for you just to demonstrate the different needs that kind of instigate segmentation. Why do we conduct segmentation? What's kind of the point? What's the driver? And you'll notice across each of these examples here how it kind of represents a business identifying maybe a specific problem or a gap in the market, and then using segmentation, not just to find a customer or a client, but the purpose here is to actually solve a real business problem, or just like kind of fill in on human need that may exist. So we're going to start off just with Debbie Ryan, first of all. And this particular company is involved in kind of crafting experiences. They also provide sort of refreshments, and then they also sell sort of knickknacks and gifts. Now, here we have segmentation that is driven by a need and a want for experiences. So Debbie Ryan have kind of segmented using psychographic and behavioral units and attributes, thinking about the importance of people wanting life moments and celebration and experience, and that being really important to them. So this particular company understood that female groups weren't just coming to them to buy gifts, but actually they were coming to create memories and to have an experience. So it's a really good example of kind of moving up that value pyramid that we shared earlier on, moving away from the functional attribute of the gift or the product to more emotional experiences, and then actually thinking about the social impact of celebration and coming together. Then if we take a look at the brand strategy, so they are a brand insight, strategy and experience agency, and they engaged in segmentation on the basis of their need for growth. So they segmented both psychographically and also looking at behavioral variables as well, rather than just looking at very traditional industry sectors. And they wanted to find a partner that would help them to grow, but they recognized that purpose-driven brands such as themselves, also need purpose-driven partners, so that they could share and vision, mission, and values in order to come together and to collaborate. So just showing here with this example how B2B segmentation can also be built around organizational values and missions. Again, coming back to what we discussed a little bit last week. The last two examples there, I can let you go through those in your own time, but Treat Kitchen were segmenting on the basis of a market change and the need to sort of pivot their business model. And then Rest Tube segmenting on kind of thinking about a gap in the market that was of interest to them as entrepreneurs. So please do feel free to take a look at those companies online or in the slides at a later stage. So look, I'm aware we've just gone through quite a lot of slides there, so I'd be keen just to take a break. But before we do, I'd just like to kind of wrap up on some benefits for segmentation. So when we segment, it enables much more easier marketing. It allows us to identify the needs of smaller groups that have common characteristics. And that, of course, will make communication more relevant, easier to do, more effective. But also, when you have those smaller groups and you truly understand those common characteristics, your marketing is significantly more effective, not just because you're reducing the amount of effort, but because you're multiplying the amount of impact that you're actually having with the same amount of resources or budget that you kind of originally had, that you were originally working with. On top of that, too, it's about finding niches. Perhaps when you're segmenting, you might identify an underserved market that is relevant to what it is that you provide. You may also identify a new market space that you can sort of walk into. And those, two sort of areas that I've just touched upon kind of link into this idea of more effective marketing, more efficient marketing, in terms of how you're deploying your resources and, how you're utilizing your budget in comparison to perhaps how your competitors are using theirs. So three separate benefits here, but very much so a compounding advantage. Better segmentation, easier marketing, the possibility of finding new markets, new niche segments as well, and then driving that efficiency, sort of freeing up resources then that you can sort of strengthen your position and look to other areas. So as I said, I'd just like to take a quick break there for about 10 minutes, as I understand that was quite a lot of slides just to go through. So perhaps if I see everyone back at about 5 to 3, if that suits everyone. All right, thank you. All right, everyone. So hopefully you can still see and hear me okay. Excuse me, my voice has just went there. So what we're going to do now is take a look at targeting, if my voice carries me through. So we have covered segmentation, moving into targeting. Then we're going to have a think about positioning. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a quick drink here. Hopefully that will be better. Then we're going to take a look at positioning, and we're going to do a couple of activities as well in relation to that, just allowing you some time to kind of reflect on where you are currently. But as I say, let's start off in the first instance with targeting. So your our targeting is essentially your capacity to identify your most profitable segment. This isn't necessarily always who's just buying from you now or who you're selling to. Rather, it's much more about making those strategic choices, which are going to drive kind of growth and profitability for you in the long run. So targeting is a really important part of the STP process, absolutely critical. So when we think about targeting everyone, and perhaps maybe that is suitable for some particular companies and in some industries, but targeting everyone essentially means targeting no one. And in today's marketplace, you're trying to appeal and to communicate to everyone with the same message can be extraordinarily difficult. And often it means that maybe your message may not land as you had intended, or perhaps it falls on deaf ears, or it isn't deemed as relevant. So instead of that, kind of what you want to achieve is to speak more meaningfully and more clearly to the people that actually really matter. So there are some different approaches then that you can take towards targeting, and we have 4 of them on the screen here. And this kind of shows how targeting evolves from a very broad perspective right through to a more precise approach. So I would like you to think of it as basically a journey, or you can think of it as initially kind of throwing a wide net out to everyone, or at the very end of this kind of spectrum here that we see on the screen, it's much more about kind of using a very precise spear to kind of target who exactly it is that you're trying to speak and sell to. So let's just run through this diagram here. So we're going to start off with undifferentiated or mass marketing, as you may be more familiar with. So here we have a whole sort of marketing offer. We're ignoring segments. So an example here might be a beverage company selling everything, selling a couple of products with one message to everyone. It's very simple. It can be very effective in certain instances, particularly for more commodity-based products, but it is becoming increasingly ineffective in sort of a more modern marketplace and a very saturated and loud marketplace at that. Then moving to differentiated marketing or segmented marketing, if you prefer. So here we would decide to target a couple of different market segments and would be offering different sort of marketing mixes for each. So again, if we're using our example of the beverage company, here they are perhaps offering sports drinks for athletes. They're offering flavored water for the more health conscious. They're maybe offering sort of low sugar, smaller, cartons or containers for kids. That's actually targeted more so than at parents. And each of these segments are different. Still drinks provision, but each segment will get its own sort of offering and marketing mix. Moving on then to thinking about concentrated or niche marketing. So here we're moving further down, getting more narrow, and we're concentrating on one or just a few segments or specific niches that are relevant to the business or the industry. So again, using our beverage company here, perhaps they are specifically sort of trying to serve upmarket food service, and that would be their concentrated area that they focus on. Finally, then we've got our micro marketing, and this can be done at a very localized level or kind of like an individual level as well. So very suitable for perhaps B2B solutions or customizations, very suitable for marketing towards specific companies or locations. Again, using our beverage company, often we see a variety of particularly alcoholic beverage producers kind of co-producing for a certain company or for a certain geographic location, and that would be defined as our micro marketing. So a variety of different approaches here that we can see on the screen, but as you move through this particular diagram, as you move right through it, it doesn't always mean better. It just means more focused. And so, your position on this diagram or spectrum should be very much driven by, the resources that you have, your current customers that you have. It should also be linked to thinking about your market opportunity too, and what kind of your aspirations are in relation to that. Now, as part of targeting as well, we often use something that is known as kind of identifying the customer profile or the client profile, or indeed persona, as it says on the screen. And the idea here is to kind of establish what the ideal customer looks like. It's really just bringing the targeting process to life, I suppose. And this process, when you're kind of developing out our customer profiles, it really should be done in line with kind of customer communication and contact, be that through sort of polls or surveys, kind of social listening or social media, interviewing, things like that, that will then help us better understand who that ideal customer or persona is and help us refine that. Alternatively, what you can do, or in tandem, you can actually utilize customer data that you have, taking a look at buying patterns and expenditure, for example, may help you kind of build out these profiles. You can also do this during the segmentation process. So you can build kind of a persona per potential segment, or you can do it afterwards, which maybe may be more sort of beneficial to kind of better help you understand the sort of the target customer and that ideal customer for those who you're actually specifically targeting. So we have two examples on the screen here. So two customers that are served by the same company. First one is Nguyen. She's female, British Asian, just under 30. She's a teacher. In terms of her psychographic and her behavioral attributes, she tends to be quite liberal, enjoys modern technology, but also, enjoys things that relate to activity in terms of female football, very self-expressive as well. Her aspirations, her ideal job would be to be an influencer or an app developer. And as a result of that, then she has quite sort of modern media choices in terms of engaging with WeChat and TikTok. Carl, again, served by the same company, but a different customer persona. So he's male, British, Black, he's in his 40s, he's highly educated, he's very career orientated as a result, but also quite traditional in his values and his beliefs. He is very focused on sort of ensuring that he has financial independence and that his children have the same opportunities that he did. And because of that kind of focus on independence and being kind of more moderate, he's very interested in independent brands, more niche brands, and thus then his media choices do tend again to be more traditional in terms of newspaper and standard TV. So as I say, two different customers being served by the same company, but these two personas provide the needed oversight on the differential between their psychographic and behavioral attributes. So it means that then we can approach these customers in different ways. And we can also then identify, customers who are maybe very different and therefore may not be in line with, what it is that we're actually trying to sell or what it is that we're trying to achieve or indeed communicate. So that brings us to our first breakout activity for this afternoon. In relation just to segmentation and targeting within your own business. So I want to give you 10 minutes just to have a chat around all of the things that we have spoken about already, but in particular some points on the screen here. So Can you identify how you currently segment your customers? Do you have a process in place? Great. If you don't, that's absolutely fine too. Perhaps we can share in ideas. Um, you may wish to think about identifying key characteristics that separate out your customers. So what makes them different? Why is that important? And then you can even expand that conversation out if you want to, kind of thinking about different channels that you use to engage these different segments, or thinking about current gaps that you may have and how you kind of maybe want to develop or evolve in terms of your current approach when it comes to segmentation and targeting. So I am going to try actually and pop you into these breakout rooms here. So do bear with me just for a second. So as I say, just about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll come back into the main room and we'll have a bit of a chat and get a bit of feedback from yourselves. All right. All right, guys. So I think that should be everybody kind of coming back into the room now. Apologies. I think maybe you got a couple of warnings about those breakout rooms closing there. I'm not very familiar with Zoom. So, look, I'd be really interested to hear just a little bit about some of the issues perhaps that maybe you discussed in your breakout rooms. I did take note just of who was in what room. So I was wondering if possibly I could start off with room one, which I think was Davy, Sinead, and was it Robbie, I think, in that room. Any thoughts at all about anything that we've kind of just went through there in the slides?
Yeah, I think Davey took us through some of the activities that they're involved as, I suppose, a bit of a complex range of customers. You got maybe Davey's probably better to explain it than me. I mean, from my perspective, we're not doing any of this with public procurement. We wait for tender opportunities. But I can see ways that we could be applying some of these techniques. We probably should be getting ahead of it a little bit more than reacting to tenders. I suppose Davy's experience was similar, trying to get onto public frameworks.
Davy, would you be interested in sort of telling us a bit about your story?
We sell water quality instruments, so in terms of getting into Ireland, we had Irish Water is obviously the big utility, but they don't manage the whole country at the minute. They manage probably about 16 out of the 26 counties, so that leaves 10 counties that still run their own water. So we managed to, we tried to approach USCA Ireland or Irish Water directly, and they didn't want to know. So we managed to find a chief engineer down in Kerry who wanted to give us a chance, put our instruments on his walls and his factories, and sort of prove ourselves. And if we didn't have that round the houses type approach, we wouldn't have got in. So all of the counties will hand over effectively to Irish Water by 2027. So we're in the process of, on top of that, they can decide who they buy the instruments from. It can be on one framework, but the people, the electricians or the people that put it on the wall could be a different framework. Mm-hmm. So you could have potentially in one county, you could have perhaps 3 or 4 different instrument manufacturers and 3 or 4 different installers. So you could potentially put an instrument on the wall through up to 9 different companies. So it makes my job quite hard. So we needed to do a lot of that segmentation as to which county, which chief engineer, which installer, and can we get in? Can we find a gap in the market to try and get in? So we had to track all of that, which is important because by 2027, all the counties will have stopped running their water. They'll hand it over to Irish Water. So we needed to get in through get our foot in the door through the back door to then give us the credibility with Irish Water when it goes to tender 2027.
Yeah, so I mean, segmentation being conducted in a very different way there, Davy, but certainly I'm guessing from your experience, it has been something that's been useful for the business.
Yeah. Yes, if we didn't do the segmentation, we would never have done it with Irish in the south.
Yeah, I suppose it kind of links back to a couple of slides back there. We're kind of talking about segmentation kind of helps you find where the opportunities may be when you mightn't initially think that that's where they lie. So it sort of ties in quite neatly with market research and things like that, trying to find where those opportunities may be. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Davy, anybody else just from the other 2 groups maybe want to chip in or tell their own sort of segmentation stories?
Well, we don't haven't segmented any of our customers, but following on from what you said earlier about finding the more profitable segments would be a interesting way forward for us because we're a supermarket. We just thought we'd target everybody. But what you were saying about targeting everybody is targeting nobody. I would definitely go back now and look at the more profitable ends and try and work a strategy for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I suppose in some industries, segmentation may not seem so attractive. And I very much understand why, because, you know, there's ways and means to reach many different customers. But yeah, I mean, even just taking a look at that more profitable end, you know, you don't need to be segmenting and providing, you know, different offerings and marketing mixes for everyone, but just trying to, you know, find out at least who's offering that kind of customer lifetime value there for you, and how can you really sort of serve them,
Yeah.
you know, in a very customer centric way, and kind of offer that kind of lifetime value. But brilliant. Elaine, there I saw maybe you turned your microphone off. You want to add in?
Yeah, I think we all sort of, Chris, Sean, and I sort of agreed that one of the main ways we want to evolve any gaps is with the data itself, you know, and just to be able to target in a better way. So, you know, you're only as good as the latest data that you have. So it's that kind of journey of, and that's something we're doing at the minute. I know the others are looking at that as well, is making sure the data, you know, you can sort of target in a more niche way. But I think all companies have had all different, really diverse actually, with Chris there with engineering consultancy, residential, private, public, B2B, B2C. So everybody's very different sort of segmentation there, and marketing. And Sean was talking, I think, Sean, maybe you could probably elaborate a bit more about just the challenges maybe you face, I think, with quite a diverse sort of range of customers as well.
Yeah, I was just explaining to Elaine, to yourself, obviously, and Chris, just that I suppose we have quite a wide-ranging client persona. We would have very few competitors that we would compete with on all of our services. We would have different competitors that would compete with us, but not compete with other competitors, if that makes sense. So, for instance, our training offering to the healthcare sector would be very, very different to our training offering to the manufacturing and construction sector. And the type of person or our type of, I suppose, buyer, our client persona would be different. As we would be targeting within private construction or manufacturing organizations would be HR, health and safety professionals, as we're within the healthcare sector, so residential or nursing homes, we would be targeting like a nurse manager or a home manager, which may not just be active on the same platforms or have the same sort of, you know, online presence as what maybe a HR professional or a health and safety professional would have. For instance, LinkedIn would be really good for that because HR professionals are very active, you know, communicating about their organization's culture or trying to lure talent, things like that as well. So it's quite a sort of a varied approach that we have to use to marketing.
Yeah. Just your example there, Sean, just sort of shows how broad sometimes segmentation can be. You know, you're not just doing it for one specific area, particularly when your business maybe serves so many different industries and sort of subsects of people. So yeah, it can, I mean, I showed that very short spectrum there of from broad to narrow, but I mean, you're showing there that there's so many different in-betweens. And it can be a long process. It is more of a journey sometimes than a destination, particularly if your business is, you know, constantly evolving and growing, and you're wanting to look for, you know, new outlets and stuff. So it's a really good example. Thank you. And thank you to everybody there who sort of contributed there to the conversation. I'm just gonna get my slides back up onto the screen here so I can see where I am at. So we're moving on now just to take a quick look at positioning, and I'm gonna sort of explain what it is, and then we're going to take a look at a particular model known as Bowman's Clock. And then again, I'm going to give you some time just to have a chat over that particular model and maybe think about whereabouts you sit on that particular clock. So we'll start off with some definitions. So positioning isn't about what your product does or its features. It's, you know, more so about what the buyer or the consumer actually thinks about the product. So it's about the product or the brand or the company owning a very specific place in your customer or client's mind. And a very simple example that is on the screen here based on pens. So if I say premium pens to yourselves, you're most likely going to go down the route of thinking about Parker as a brand, for example. You're not going to think of Bic. But if I said everyday pen, that's probably the brand that you would likely think about. And so that sort of shows off an example of successful positioning. They do exactly the same job, However, they have a different brand feel. One obviously on the luxury end of things, and one just on the commodity end of things. But there is a modern challenge today, certainly. We've got endless choices on shelf. It's a bit of a paradox of choice sometimes as well. It's very overwhelming for consumers, and this is particularly true, I think, in the B2C world. So it definitely means that positioning needs to be crystal clear and very authentically stated, but tied back kind of to your vision, your mission, your values, all those things that we kind of talked about last week. So positioning and VMV sort of tightly linked. It all has to be consistent, because at the end of the day, customers, clients, they're not just buying features. They're not just, buying price or product. They have identified your company as relevant to them for a job to be done. They've identified you as relevant, and they're conducting information search on you for a purpose. And it's probably based upon the positioning that you kind of occupy in their mind or in their world or industry. Now, there's a variety of different ways that you can position, and certainly this list on the screen here is not exhaustive, but we'll go through a couple of them anyway. So you can position your product, your solution, your service to make a connection using your features. So it's a feature-driven prompt. Here you're specifically emphasizing capabilities, features, characteristics that make your product unique, make it special. That is sort of similar, but not the same as sort of a problem or solution positioning or prompt, because here what we're addressing is the customer pain point. So you're framing your offering as a solution to a specific problem that maybe your customer or client might have. Then you've got your target-driven positioning, probably a more fundamental sort of way to segment. So here your strategy is focused on tailoring your message very specifically to addressing a unique need or a very unique preference. So this would happen when you've kind of conducted maybe niche targeting. So you want to kind of understand what the preference is with that particular niche market, and then position using that. We've got competition driven positioning. So here you're doing that relative to your competitor. So it may be that you want to align with what they do and then offer a slight tweak on that. Or indeed, you may wish to deposition yourself from them. So actually create distance from your competitor by saying, okay, they may do X, but we have got Y. And that makes us totally different. Then there's emotional and psychological positioning. We've talked about this when we look at the value pyramid. So, appealing to that emotional and psychological trigger rather than, going down the more rational benefits route. Benefit-driven positioning, though, does do that. So it's all about the tangible outcomes. It's the advantages that somebody is going to gain from using a particular product, service, solution. So again, similar to kind of feature and problem-based, but different because it's all about the outcomes, the convenience, the advantage. Aspirational then does what it says on the tin, very much about kind of directing or communicating on the basis of like a desired future state. What is the aspiration of yourself as a company, and then also your client. And then finally, value positioning. In a way, it kind of encompasses everything that is on the screen here and that we've just talked about. But often when we do mention value positioning, we kind of think about the relationship between price and value perception or quality. So showing how your offering actually delivers superior return, against competitors, but also against the price that you're actually charging. Now, all of those strategies there, not mutually exclusive. You can very much mix and match. You can see that some of them cross over anyway, but good to sort of see a variety of different examples as to how you can position or even use those as pillars for ideas to communicate. But as I said there, in terms of value positioning, we often highlight this importance between sort of perceived value against price. And this is what we see as part of Bowman's strategic clock. and to help you find your positioning, especially in relation to sort of price and perceived value. We can use this framework. It's basically a positioning compass, I suppose, that will help you understand where you're sitting in your market. So if we look at the clock face here, they're defining 8 different positions in the market in relation to what the customer perceives the value is against the price. So it's not just a model that helps you kind of see where you sit. It may also help you decide what pricing strategy and what perception of value means to your customer. And it helps you maybe reflect a little bit more on what your customer needs and wants are, particularly in relation to price. So I'm just going to run through an example with you of Bowman's clock, and then we'll sort of do another quick activity before we close today. But just to show you how this works. So if we start off at point number 1, we have low price and low added value. So if we think back to when Lidl and Aldi sort of first came to the UK market, they were often seen as low price, low added value. They had limited localization and they had limited product differentiation. And so if you went in to Lidl, for example, it may have been quite difficult to get your full shop. You may have found yourself going other places to kind of get what it was that you needed. And in fact, even that may still exist a little bit today for Lidl and Aldi, but certainly we've seen them move through this strategic clock through sort of low price and into hybrid, where they've started to add that localization, relationships with local farmers, diversifying in terms of their lower cost right through to a more sort of differentiated or quality product. So they've been adding value beyond just being that discounter. As we move sort of then through the clock up into position number 4, we see differentiation. And certainly we could probably place the likes of Sainsbury's, Tesco's here, even Asda, because they do offer, of course, so many different product ranges, product brands and categories. But what we are seeing is that Asda and other sort of the big 5, is it? Move to kind of return to that everyday low pricing, because that is what the market has kind of evolved to need at the moment. So we're seeing those kinds of supermarkets shift between point number 2 and point number 4 in the clock at the moment, because of how the market is currently sitting. Point number 5 then is all about this focused differentiation. So we could say the likes of Ocado and Marks and Spencer's would sit here. They offer that focused differentiation on the basis of luxury and quality and taste. Ocado probably has that focused differentiation based on their digital side of the business. Moving between 5 and 6, we also have Amazon. I think it depends maybe where you're based. They don't necessarily deal so much in terms of grocery and that kind of retail here. But we do see that they engage in a considerable amount of sort of platform innovation and engaging with different brands to create sort of like almost brand platforms and brand pages on Amazon, on their digital platform. Now, that innovation can be really beneficial for some segments, and some customers might actually absolutely love that and love that kind of engagement and interaction, but it may not work so well for others. We also see that sometimes Amazon are a lot more pricey than what other stores may be. Their added value there, of course, is their next day delivery, or if you're in Northern Ireland, it does take 2 days. So there are slightly riskier, higher margins there for Amazon, and they're moving sort of between that 0.5 and 0.6. If we take a look at point number 7, best example for that would likely be when you're in the airport. Perhaps if you're going to Boots, or there's a Tesco Express, there it's monopoly pricing. It's a higher price, lower perceived value, lower longevity of value as well for the products that you're probably buying there. But it's the only option. You tend to be quite trapped. So, you're based in one place. That means that our stores, our retailers can command that higher price because, again, the customer is kind of locked in or trapped, if you like. Then finally, point number 8 is our loss of market share. And we referenced a couple of these businesses earlier on in today's session. Woolworths is a good example. You know, an average price, nothing special about it, but a consistently decreasing perceived value because of a lack of movement and change with the market and customer demands, and thus, you know, you've loss of market share as a result. So admittedly, this is a very pure kind of marketing model here. So, you know, it is quite academic in a sense, but certainly, you know, may help you kind of understand not only where you sit, but again, you know, to consider how you might build out your competitive advantage, or how you might move in terms of your pricing strategies. So that's an example there of Bowman's Clock, but I do want to give you some time, and we'll maybe just take about 5 minutes, just in a quick breakout room, and to let you chat over what you think of that as a model, what you think of Bowman's Clock, if you think that that's something that may be of use to you. Have a chat about where you think you currently sit in terms of the clock. I think an example of it may be in your workbook, so you have access to it, so you can see it. Why you feel you occupy that particular position, and if you feel that you could move. Alternatively, if positioning is a brand new thing to you, just about, you know, having a chat around the concept. So, as I say, just a very quick breakout room on this. So I'm just gonna hopefully be able to set those for 5 minutes here. There we are. Okay, so the room should open now, and we'll bring you back in 5 minutes. Everybody, that's back in now to the main room. So hopefully some interesting conversations going on there. I know it was a very short period of time, just I'm wary that 4 p.m. is upon us, but just wondering if anybody has any kind of thoughts on, I mean, even just kind of Bowman's Clock as an academic model, or sort of your own experiences with positioning, if you have anything that any success of stories, I suppose, that you'd maybe like to share.
Suppose we were surmising that it's quite difficult to sort of put yourself in one part of it. It
Yeah.
very much is a bit of a mix of different areas. And I think for us, you know, hybrid, a bit of differentiation from other credit unions and the type of product ranges. We would have more loan products than a lot of other credit unions, and equally the pricing model, like low price, we would have one of the lowest interest rates. So we're kind of a bit of different areas there, but it's hard to kind of, I think it's a very good model to strike the conversation of where you think you're sitting, but it's not just black and white. Sure, it's not.
Yeah, no, that's true. But it's good to sort of note that you can certainly move, you know, between the different points in the compass, I suppose, particularly for different offerings that you may have, so that you have an idea of, you know, where particular products and offerings that you are providing, you know, where they sit. So not just yourselves as an entire company, you can break it down even further if helpful for you, you know.
And I think just I'll give somebody else a chance to speak, but no, Chris and group there, it was interesting for him. He might speak about it there, because you'd almost be using the clock for different parts of his business. It's quite diverse.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah, definitely depends on the service. I think we could fit different services into different categories on the clock, really. And that's a lot of that in our line of work is to do with the level of competition in each of those services. Where there's little competition, you know, you find yourself in that sort of the differentiation side, or you know, that sort of upper right portion of the clock. And on others, it's constantly trying to innovate to increase value. That's the big thing, where there's a lot of competition. Yeah, so to try and stay ahead of the curve that way.
Absolutely, Chris. I think, yeah, you're right. Sometimes the question isn't, you know, where are we sitting on the clock as a company? It's, are our different services sitting at the right spot that we want them to be sitting in, you know, doing it from a more in-depth perspective, especially when you've so much going on. So yeah, really an important point raised there. Absolutely. Any other final sort of comments before maybe we just move on to our final slides and close for today? Happy enough. I'm just gonna pull my slides back up here so I can see again where I'm at. So hopefully you can still see everything and you're moving along with me here. But just to kind of close on positioning, you know, the great thing is for SMEs is that you do have quite a considerable amount of freedom, you know, when it comes to positioning. Larger companies are, you know, often competing across many different attributes with many different competitors, cannot be as agile and as focused as what SMEs can be. So, you know, you do have opportunity to position really on pretty much anything that your target segment does care about, and a couple of examples on the screen there. But really overall, my point is you don't need to be everything to everyone. You just need to be something of relevance, something important to, you know, a specific group of people, or a number of specific segments that are interested in, you know, what you provide. So as I say, a couple of examples on the screen there. You know, it's not a checklist, you know, you don't have to be everything, nor is this list complete, I suppose. But it's really important to try and test your positioning with your customers. So, you know, you can try that through a variety of different kind of communication tactics. Even down your positioning even comes down to kind of brand logos and visualizations and aesthetics as well. So it's always good to kind of get feedback from your customers and clients on those elements. But we will leave sort of the segmentation, targeting and positioning there for today. And I've just one or two more slides in relation to the consumer decision-making process and then the marketing 4 Ps. I think I mentioned earlier, you know, look, this will just be a brief introduction, simply because we will specifically be looking at the 4 Ps next week as part of our in-session or in-person session on Thursday next week. So we're just briefly going to go through this. So on the screen here, what we have is the consumer decision-making process or journey, if you prefer, for both B2C and B2B. Now, obviously, there are differences in this journey, and I'd just kind of like to go through that with you. But first and foremost, if we take a look at the B2C journey, we can see that it starts off with a recognition of need. There is a job to be done. And so the consumer then moves to information search to try and find out what they need to know as to how they are going to fill that void or gap or problem that they may have. Once they have enough information about a variety of different brands or products, services, they will move into the evaluation of alternatives stage. Here they will be comparing, contrasting, they will be asking friends, family, looking for reviews online. At this stage too, this tends to be where, you know, the majority of consumers fall out of the purchase journey because they have found a different value proposition from a competitor that may be of interest. But once they have evaluated all of those alternatives, they will then make a decision which pushes them into the purchase section of the journey. Here again, they will be, you know, looking for more information around, you know, what the company is, what they offer, and the product. Hopefully then, of course, leading to that post-purchase evaluation. They've bought the product, the service, the solution, and now they are evaluating it. So they're looking at sort of the benefits and the sacrifices that they've made in order to get that actual product. So that's the journey. It tends to be a much more informal process for consumers or for the B2C world. Often with much lower value, but with much higher frequency. It tends to, as a result of that, then kind of deliver upon more short-term goals and needs, but of course will be much more complex and elongated if it's for a very expensive or major purchase. What you also find today is that on that B2C journey is that digital kind of mediates it all. It is there for the entire customer journey. And you may also find that those consumers are actually engaging in kind of like a digital community, which is informing them during that information search and also as part of that evaluation of alternatives. Now, when we look at the B2B decision-making process, significantly different. As I'm sure you are well aware, it tends to be a lot more formalized. It also depends on whether or not you're interacting with, a small business owner, or you're maybe, engaging more so with procurement, for example. So this process will change. You'll also find that the importance or the weighting of each of these steps will differ, depending again on who you're engaging with. So personal selling may be more important for an owner and developing out those relationships. But again, if you're kind of dealing with a procurement department, then they're going to be more focused and structured on sort of the tender process. So definitely more formalized than the B2C approach. So of course we move from recognition of need then into that solution specification, a supplier search, who's going to fulfill that need. There's an evaluation of those proposals. After that, then it's the supplier selection and then into that performance review. So it does have similarities, but as I say, more formal, of much higher value, often very reliant on those kind of interpersonal skills and relationships between individuals essentially. Can be quite structured, designed there not just for the short term, but also for the long term as well. It can involve multiple individuals, and in terms of that digital aspect, you'll find that yes, it may be used to kind of open doors, but again, that interpersonal element can be really, really important. And certainly digital may not be used for kind of the entire conversation and building out that contract or relationship. But just kind of extending this a little bit further and looking at an example of the marketing activity that comes alongside each of the steps. We're going to use the example of sort of B2C here. So in our recognition of need stage, there needs to be enough awareness through the company's branding so that at least the consumer is aware that this company exists, that when they have a recognition of need, when they need a solution, that brand comes to mind. In terms of the information search, the marketing activity there would be relative to being at the right place online, understanding where your consumers are, knowing where your audience is, and ensuring that you're there too, providing the right information at the right time. The evaluation of alternatives can be linked to brand building activities, but I think even more so, as I said earlier, that's where a lot of consumers will fall out of the purchase journey. They'll fall out of the funnel and you lose that custom. So, really ensuring that your value proposition is clear, perhaps personalized emails and communications at that stage if they've already kind of engaged with you and given over their contact details. At the purchase stage, you may be interested in kind of offering or emailing out some kind of discount or additional communications and kind of encouragement to ensure that that the lead is converted. And then finally moving into that post-purchase evaluation. So of course you're after purchase care and your sort of customer check-ins, your surveys, sort of requesting product reviews and things like that. So some stages here we can see on both of the journeys, B2C and B2B, will be quicker than others. Some will be more in depth than others. It will depend on the expense and the longevity, of the goal as well. So very idiosyncratic, as with many things that we have discussed over the past 2 weeks. But just to close, I just want to introduce to you the 4 Ps of marketing. So our product, price, place, and promotion. Again, I'm just doing this because we will use it next week, but I also have just a takeaway activity for yourselves after today in relation to the 4 Ps, and I think it's in your workbook as well. So many of you no doubt are familiar with the 4 Ps, but just to break it down, so our product is referring to considerations to do with everything and anything about what is put into market. So product, service, solution, whatever it may be, what it looks like, what it does, its functionality, its features, its quality, its packaging, its communication on the packaging, so on and so forth. So that's in relation to your product or products. Then price is kind of considering the price that an end consumer or client, you know, wholesale, trading, whatever kind of area you're working in, you know, what their attitudes are to that price and what they're willing to pay. It also links to whether or not discounting and promotions may be appropriate, and also in terms of what formats of payment and financial considerations and conditions may need to be put in place. Following that then is our distribution or our place. So this can be macro or micro. So in terms of, yes, what countries we operate in, are we sort of national or regional, but it also works right down to where we actually occupy space on a shelf or how a product is displayed. That is sort of our micro element of place. Online channels, of course, also really important here. So, you know, thinking about whether or not online is relevant to you and whether things like social platforms for selling are also relevant. And then finally, just our promotion, which links into our communication, our advertising, etc. So this isn't just about channels, but it's also about how you communicate and the message that you are putting forward. But just sort of to wrap up on the 4 Ps, do note many of these and all of them kind of interlap or overlap, sorry, I should say interlink and overlap. You know, when we think about sort of social media, it can be very much considered as promotion and communication, but with selling links now that are often attached in bios and whatnot, and sort of direct links, they are also considered now as part of your place. So they fall under that element as well. So our takeaway activity then just for today is to kind of think about how your business is currently operating in terms of your 4 Ps. So what is the product? And then linking that back to, you know, the questions that we've just posed in terms of product. What selling price does your product or service have and why? What place does your product or service have? Where is it sold? What else could it be? And then finally, of course, just looking at those promotional elements. Where are your target audience? You know, where are they based? How can you communicate with them? And is that the most sort of appropriate route for you? So as I say, we'll discuss a little bit more of this next week. But that is us for today. I know it's just after maybe a minute or so after 4 o'clock. So thanks so much for joining in. Great to see you this afternoon. Thanks so much for all of your contributions as well. If anybody has any questions, very happy to have a chat. Otherwise, again, thanks so much for attending this afternoon. And I'll see you in person next Thursday in the Businessville.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.